Hey, welcome to round 3 of my gimbal review-a-thon. Today I am reviewing the Zhiyun Crane version 2, which is not to be confused with the Zhiyun Crane 2, which was just announced. So the Zhiyun Crane version 2 is what I'm reviewing here. So I've been using the V1 of the Zhiyun Crane over the last year for a lot of shoots, and the number one reason I use it is just because it's reliable and it doesn't give me weird vibrations even if I'm using a different camera, a different lens than usual. If I'm holding it at a weird angle, it just doesn't vibrate. And most of the other gimbals that I've used, for instance at this angle or at this angle or like that angle, or with a big prime lens on a small camera body, they give weird vibrations from the motors. And those vibrations find their way into the footage, and then I can't remove it in post because of the rolling shutter. It just has too much jello in it. With the Crane, I never had those worries. Okay, basic statistics for this gimbal. The capacity is 3.9 pounds. The battery life is approximately 12 hours, and it's a bit smaller than the original Crane without sacrificing any of the performance. The great thing about the update to the design is it can feasibly fit in a lot of standard sized backpacks. If you have a backpack that has a sleeve for like a 15-inch computer, you can probably slide this in that sleeve with a camera like the A7S II and a lens attached and just travel with it all intact. Most of the other gimbals in this weight class are longer and heavier than the Zhiyun Crane V2, so this one really wins in terms of portability. It does have a continuous time-lapse mode, which I am not going to cover in this video, but I will cover in a separate video. And as usual, I'm going to have a whole bunch of test footage for you in this video. I'm going to use the A7S primarily with the 16 to 35mm lens as you see here, but I'm also going to use the ROKINON 85mm f1.4 lens because I just wanted to see how it handles an unstabilized prime. Bear in mind, the A7S II does have in-body image stabilization, so I'm going to show it with in-body stabilization activated and with the in-body stabilization turned off. Balancing the gimbal is very easy. It has some knobs that are easily unscrewed. You can easily slide the different axes, and I found that for some reason the Cranes are just remarkably simple to balance, whereas other gimbals seem to be more difficult. The great thing about the Cranes actually is even if it's not balanced perfectly, I found that it tends to work just fine. Now once you have it balanced, you press down the power button and the gimbal comes to life. The Zhiyun Crane takes a little bit of a second to power on, which is okay, but sometimes it's confusing to me if it's powered on or if it's not powered on and I have to press the power button a few times. Not really a big deal, just kind of a minor annoyance. What is more annoying than that is the fact that the power button and the mode button are right next to each other and they look exactly the same. And if I'm holding the gimbal in an unusual way and I forget which button is which, I can't tell just by feeling them which is which. So I'll sometimes press the power button thinking I'm changing modes, and then it won't change modes, and then I have to switch and press the mode button. Another minor ergonomic quibble. It's not really a big deal, but it's something that I kind of wish that they had addressed. You know, I wish one of the buttons just looked and felt a bit different. The gimbal also features the ability to control your camera's power zoom via a little rocker here on the handle. You can take a cable from the camera and connect it to a little port here, and then you can control it remotely. I've never bothered because I don't do a whole lot of power zooms while I'm shooting. I also don't need to remotely trigger the record and stop of the camera, which you can also do from the handle if you use that cable. For me, it's just as easy to press the record button on the camera, and I'd rather not deal with an extra cable. Changing modes. It starts up in pan follow mode. Press the mode button once, it goes to full lock mode where nothing is followed. Press it twice and it goes to full follow mode. Press it once to go back to pan follow mode. It's really simple. It's the simplest of the gimbals, I think, in terms of operation. There is a joystick which you can control with your thumb while you're shooting. It's conveniently placed, it's easy to access, but it's restricted based on which mode the gimbal is in. So if you have it in full follow mode, the joystick for some reason only controls the roll. And if you're in pan follow mode, the joystick will only control the tilt. I see why they programmed it like this. It's sort of an idiot-proofing measure, but I would much rather be able to control all of the axes from all of the modes, because sometimes I want to do something like tilt the camera up and then have it follow as I arc the gimbal down, because this flashlight mode is really helpful for keeping the motor strong while I'm doing a move at an extreme angle. If instead I have to start from neutral and then angle the gimbal like this to get that high angle and then wrench it back down like that, The motors don't like that as much, and it shows up as a little bit of jitter in the footage, which you'll see in the sample footage. So if Zhiyun could just unlock the joystick and let me use all of the axes in every mode, that would make my shooting life a lot easier with this gimbal, and I would be much more inclined to use it over competitors like the Moza Air. As far as the ergonomics for this gimbal, I really like it. The handle's easy to hold onto, it's comfortable to hold for long periods of time. I just generally like the way that it's designed. The Zhiyun Crane V2 does have optional dual handles, which I don't use because I just like to stay as mobile as possible. I like to keep the gimbal as small as possible. I want to be able to pull it out of a backpack and use it immediately, and having the dual handles means an extra step in getting set up. So it's just not something that I'm a fan of. So the Crane V2 is powered by these tiny generic batteries. These are the reason why the handle is shorter. These are smaller yet higher capacity batteries than the ones you put in the Crane V1. And what I like about them is you can have as many extra pairs as you want on you in case they go bad or you forget to charge some. You can have extras on standby. And they seem to last forever. It's about a 12-hour battery life, so you can shoot for a couple of days straight intensely with this gimbal and not worry about the batteries dying on you. One thing I do not like about the design, which is carried over from the Crane V1 and I think is going to be the same on the Crane 2, but don't quote me on that, the motor is only on the right side. You can't flip it over to put the motor on the left. I don't like this because with Sony cameras, that means that your SD card with some cameras is blocked. Fortunately not with the A7S II, but the battery is always blocked. I can't get that battery out of there if I need to change it without removing the camera from the Crane. It's just a pain. If they could put the motor on the left, it would make my life a lot easier. Although the Crane 2, I believe, is supposed to power the camera. So if that's the case, then there's no worry about the batteries at all. I'd love to be able to just run off of those big lithium batteries that are inside of the Crane. So the Crane V2 does have a remote control, which I don't have, so I can't review it. It also has an app that works on iOS and it works on Android. Now the app situation with the Crane is a little bit weird because they have the ZY Play app and they also have the Zhiyun Assistant app. To the best of my knowledge, the difference between the two is that the Play app is designed to work with your smartphone's camera if you're using your smartphone on the gimbal, so that you can sort of control the camera and you can control the gimbal from a single app. So I use the Zhiyun Assistant app, which just lets you control the basic calibration parameters, but you can't really customize things in the app. I think this is part of them making it accessible to people who are new to gimbals. I would love to be able to go in and add a mode where it can follow your roll, like you can do with the joystick here. I'd like that to be a follow mode. And with the open source Simple BGC software, which is what a lot of the more advanced gimbals run on, you can go in and you can configure what it follows, you can configure all the different parameters of the follow, but with the Zhiyun app it's very restricted. You can't change anything about the way the buttons work. All you can do is change basically how fast it follows you and how smooth that following is. Okay, on to the test footage. Because I'm so familiar with the Zhiyun Crane, because I've used it so much in my shoots, I decided to highlight what it's sort of weakest at, which is those extreme angles, like tilting up and then swinging around and then tilting back down, or panning while walking quickly or running. Maybe for those kinds of movements, the motors just aren't quite strong enough. I'm not quite sure what the cause is, but it seems to just get a little bit jittery and I'm not quite satisfied with that. Otherwise, if you're using the gimbal moderately, in my experience, it tends to be really smooth and perform really well. Final thoughts on Zhiyun Crane V2? Well, it's pretty much the same gimbal as the Crane 1, just a little bit smaller and a little bit lighter, and the battery lasts longer, all of which are improvements in my opinion. So this is a highly functional, really well-designed gimbal. I like it a lot. The only thing I don't like is that it doesn't handle those extreme angles all that well. And I used to accept that as just sort of a drawback of the gimbal, and I lived with it until I tried out the Moza Air, which does handle those extreme angles really well. And in my opinion, it's worth it to deal with the little bit of extra size and weight increase of the Moza Air and a few of the extra quirks of that gimbal in order to be able to access some of those angles that otherwise I would not be able to do with the V2. So in my opinion, it is a great first gimbal, especially for anybody who wants to keep size and weight to a minimum and who doesn't want to have to worry about their battery going dead in the middle of a shoot. I do recommend the Zhiyun Crane V2.